The indifference shown to my colleagues is disgraceful.
And all of them were telling us Trump sent us. Nobody else, there was nobody else. It was not Antifa, it was not Black Lives Matters.
I became very emotional and began yelling, how the blank could something like this happen? Is this America?
You know, you talk about the impact of that day, but you guys won. You guys held. Our mission is very simple. It's to find the truth, and it's to ensure accountability.
Good evening, Black people and all allies fighting for Black liberation, Black prosperity, and Black joy. I'm Charles Blow, and welcome to Prime. The first hearing on the insurrection is in the books. The House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack held its first hearing today, convening for 3.5 hours earlier this afternoon. 4 law enforcement officers who were on the front lines during the attack gave powerful, emotional testimony. They provided chilling accounts of what happened, including being knocked unconscious, beaten, and fearing death. They, as well as some committee members, choked up several times as they relived the trauma of the day. One of the most harrowing moments came when Officer Harriot, a 13-year veteran of the Capitol Police Force and the only Black officer who testified, recounted enduring racist slurs during the attack. Take a listen to this.
One woman in a pink MAGA shirt yelled, "You hear that, guys? It's for Joe Biden." Then the crowd, perhaps around 20 people, joined in screaming, "Boo!" No one had ever called me a while wearing the uniform of a Capitol Police officer. In the days following the attempted insurrection, other Black officers shared with me their own stories of racial abuse on January 6th. One officer told me he had never, and in his entire 40 years of life, been called a to his face, and that streak ended on January 6th.
Joining me now to discuss is senior writer at TheRoot.com, Michael Harriot. So Michael, should we be at all surprised that many of the people who were part of the insurrection were also flaming aggressive, violent racists?
Well, I think that's what we assumed anyway. You know, if you told me you were going to a MAGA rally, well, not you, but a person, you know, you would assume that you would meet some racists there. You would assume that you would meet some very aggressive white nationalists. So, you know, it's kind of like the mix of all the worst kinds of white people. Now, I wonder if people are considering considering when Hillary Clinton called them deplorables, and we said that was a bad thing to say, and it turned out she was right.
Well, not we, but the collective we. But did you hear anything today that surprised you? I mean, it was all horrifying, but was it surprising?
Well, I think I think we have gotten the scope of the violence that occurred there in bits and pieces, but we hadn't heard, you know, officers' reviews, but we hadn't just heard the officers testify, give their version of the events, you know, in excruciating detail. And it was kind of scary, you know, even if you've seen the films and, you know, recounted whatever happened that day, you know, just hearing them talk about it from their perspective. You know, most of us have never been on either side of a mob, and to have that kind of a mob coming at you, you know, even though we kind of knew the bits and pieces of the story, it was still kind of shaking to hear it in detail from the firsthand view.
What do you think? What do you think the impact of this testimony, these officers testifying in uniform, has on the kind of Blue Lives Matter play that Republicans had been kind of playing for as a counter note to Black Lives Matter? And do you think that some Republicans will just go about trying to vilify them in the same way that, you know, people who testify in uniform during impeachment were vilified rather than honored?
Yeah, so, you know, it's interesting to think about that, too, because, you know, we've been led to believe that Republicans and people who vote Republicans believe in certain things. They believe in law and order, they said, for the last 2 years, and then it turned out they didn't. And they believed in fiscal responsibility, and it turned out they didn't. And then they said they believed in, you know, in following the, you know, Blue Lives Matter and all of that stuff. And now it's turning out that they didn't. And I don't know if this hearing will have any kind of impact on the diehard Republican trolls, the stands for Donald Trump. I don't know if it's going to have any impact on them because, you know, a pandemic that killed people didn't, and the truth didn't, and an election didn't, and all of the facts that have come out since he's been president, you know, they haven't had any effect. So I don't know if this is meant to convince those people as much as it is to get to the truth for the larger, saner republic.
I want to play for you some sound from Officers Fanone and Hodges on what they want Congress to do now and get your response to that on the other side.
That is what I am looking for, is an investigation into those actions and activities which may have resulted in the events of January 6th, and also whether or not there was collaboration between those members, their staff, and these terrorists.
I need you guys to address if anyone in power had a role in this, if anyone in power coordinated or aided or abetted or tried to downplay, tried to prevent the investigation of this terrorist attack.
So, Michael, do you believe this is going to happen? This is going to require quite a few subpoenas of records for sitting members of Congress, as well as many members of the former Trump administration, and possibly even Trump's records included. Do you think that they're going to be able to do all that?
Well, I think they can. One of the things that we have to consider is, like, maybe they already know. I mean, I don't understand how anyone could think that they didn't already subpoena, for instance, the video cameras and the videotapes or the video footage from the day before the insurrection. So you would imagine that the Department of Justice knows exactly which members of Congress led people on tours. You know, you would imagine that the Department of Justice would have looked at phone records already and talked to the people who they've already arrested, and they could have put together pieces of the puzzle that we don't know about and that might come out in this hearing. But, you know, we don't know everything that they have, but it wouldn't take a big investigation to do this because much of it is on camera and on the internet. And the other thing is, can you think of any event of this magnitude, whether it's, you know, the white supremacist march in Virginia or 9/11 or anything like that of this magnitude that hasn't had a thorough investigation? It would be the first time in American history that something like this has happened and then we just forgot about it.
Well, yeah, I get that you have, you know, that there are cameras in public places that would have captured people. But I think that what's going to be required here is personal phone records, personal correspondence records. I think that is where it becomes tricky for sitting members of Congress, one group of members of Congress to say, we want the phone records of another group of members of Congress. You think that will happen?
Well, you know, what we're forgetting that the cell tower that encapsulates the Capitol is federal property, and it captures every phone, cell phone, landline that goes in and out. That's how they caught a lot of these people, because there is a special tower that nobody has to give them permission to. So they can look at the tower records, and maybe they could compare them to people who weren't on the scene that day. But again, a lot of this stuff we might not know, and the individual members of Congress might not know, but I would imagine that there's someone at the Department of Justice and the FBI who has a lot of the stuff that we say, well, they should subpoena this. A lot of that they won't have to subpoena.
Officer Dunn also said that they were not forewarned by leadership about the amount of violence that was going to be headed their way, and we now know that there were warning signs that people in higher up knew about. How kind of complicated and implicated could the higher ups be just in the Capitol Police structure, in all of the policing structure around what happened in the insurrection, not just Capitol Police? How high could that go in terms of people just suppressing or holding back information that officers could have used to prepare themselves for how violent this was going to be? Well,
you have to think that the people, the higher ups, the people higher up in the police department, in the Capitol Police Department, and in the DC Police Department, and in the FBI, the Department of Justice, probably, like, me and you and people like us, we say, like, this is an example of racism, but I think the biggest part of the biggest racist part of this is that, like, I think that they just couldn't believe that white people would do something like this, when history is replete with instances of white people doing stuff like this. Like, they couldn't imagine this happening, even though it just happened in Virginia, even though it just happened in Michigan. They tried to kidnap the governor, right? And even our recent history is filled with examples of things like this happening and forewarnings. So, the only thing that I could imagine is, like, not even I don't even think it takes a conspiracy. I think it was just like the unbelievable idea that white people would resort to something like this over a presidential election. It seems so out of hand, except when you go through history, we know it happens a lot.
Absolutely. It is very hard for America to call white terrorists. I completely agree with you, Michael. Harriot, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, Michael. Did religion play a role in the insurrection? Our next guest helps answer that question. You're watching Prime on BNC.